Welcome. This webinar is brought to you by the New Hampshire Training Institute on Addictive Disorders. You can access the recording of this website at our website at www.nahatica.org. After completing this webinar, please upload and complete the quiz if you are interested in receiving a certificate. You can find the quiz in the file pod throughout this presentation or at our website. You can also email the Training Institute at nahatica.org. Please email, mail, or fax a completed quiz. The contact information is on the quiz itself. If you are a member of Nahatica, the certificate for the webinar is free. If you aren't a member, the fee is $15. You will receive a credit worth 1 CE once you have completed, passed the quiz, and paid for the webinar, if applicable. Through the New Hampshire Training Institute on Addictive Disorders, this one-hour event is pre-approved by the New Hampshire Board of Licensing for alcohol and other drug use professionals, as well as the NBCC. If you have any problems viewing this webinar, audio problems, or any other technical questions, please contact us at 603-225-7060. Please email any questions regarding the material to traininginstitute@nahatica.org. You can find these introduction slides in the file pod to the right of your screen. I will now turn you over to Stephen Andrews, who is going to talk to us today about motivational interviewing basics.
Thank you. My hope is that in this conversation we have for the next hour, that you see this as a motivational conversation for people who are struggling with alcohol and other drug misuse, abuse, and dependency. Motivational interviewing. You know, after a number of years of doing assessment, diagnosis, and treatment, trying to help people with their struggles, I finally learned a model that was helpful to me to change the way I did my work. So, as you can see by my biography, I'm a storyteller, a trainer, a therapist, and an author. And since 2000, I've been practicing, learning, and practicing some more motivational interviewing. I've now been to 15 countries and learned motivational interviewing in many different languages. Most of all, I want to say that as a father, I've learned how to do a motivational conversation. So here's our journey. I want you to think about some things as we start. I want you to think about that challenging patient or client or consumer, the person who came into your life and you felt like they weren't going to change. They were argumentative, passive-aggressive, self-destructive, pushing against you as a resistant client. That's what this conversation is going to be for. And so what we're going to try to do is to have a couple of things that I want you to think about. First, I'd love you to think about unsolicited advice. Unsolicited advice is the number one demotivator. And so over the next hour, I'm going to talk to you about what to do instead. Instead of the constant questions and the solutions and the warnings and the hope for an action plan. What can we do instead? With this wonderful, difficult problem of alcohol and other drug use, misuse, and dependency. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my son. He's 18 now. And he's taught me more about motivational interviewing than anyone else. I just think that motivational interviewing is not a way of being with clients. It's a way of being. It's a way of thinking about people. It's a highly compassionate-based, respectful model. So what is it? Well, first and foremost, I'd like to tell you that it's not. It's not the stages of change. It is not the decisional balance sheet. It is not solution-focused. It's not cognitive behavioral treatment. It is, though, a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with a particular attention to the language of change, to change theory, to what we call change talk. It is designed to be a way to strengthen people's own inner wisdom, their own personal motivation. Mark Nepo, a great philosopher and author, he writes about the soft, compassionate voice that lives within. Parker Palmer, in the book Inner Courage, speaks to the shy soul. Each of these is a way of seeing that people have their own personal, internal motivation for change. And then they have a commitment language. And that commitment language will tell you the probability of their change. The whole point of this, though, is to create an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. Compassion is best defined as the ability to sit with the suffering, the struggle, the duality, the dilemma, the conflict that lives within people and their present behavior and their dreams, their wishes. So, as you look at this, just take a moment and think about, how can I create a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication that's focused on change? So what are the challenges? What are the challenges to your work? People report that it's very difficult to do motivational interviewing because they have too much documentation, or they have too many questions to ask, or they have too many assessments to do. They just really have to get people to change. What I would suggest to you, that the biggest challenge is the writing reflex. The writing reflex that lives within all of us is a compassionate writing reflex. I know it seems bizarre, but what I'd like us to know is to hold the right position is to destroy the working alliance. I know that sounds absolutely bizarre, because people are expecting, the culture is expecting, the community is expecting you to be the expert and to come up with the right position for people. But every bit of research says Holding the right position destroys relationships. So the challenge generally is for us to let go of the right position for something greater. And that something greater is the working alliance, the Therapeutic Alliance. By creating a working alliance, no matter what you're doing with people, has to be their first process. We call it engagement. Before you can do anything else. The challenge is usually ourselves. Sometimes it's the organization, sometimes it's the situation. The wow moments, some of our wow moments are, I just sat with a young 17-year-old young man who blacked out drinking and fell on his head and broke his skull. And after having worked with him for several weeks prior to that event, I was able to get him and his family to enter into treatment at a local treatment center. And I remember the family coming back and telling me that how important my relationship was to their son. I remember feeling, wow. Because at the time I felt frustrated, he was still drinking. So some of my secrets in difficult situations are lately I've been trying to start every session with a prayer. The prayer is, may I be of service to the suffering with compassion and kindness. May I be of service to the suffering with compassion and kindness. It's a hard thing to do. I notice that when I'm ready to tell people what to do, and it's hard, I frequently can feel that part of me that wants to be helpful through advice giving, even though it demotivates people, even though it's the number one demotivator. I can still feel it. I can still feel the impulse. I can even feel people asking me, and again, I may answer them. But I wonder what it'd be like if they came up with their own ideas. I'm interested in, how many of you would think if a patient or client or consumer comes up with their own ideas, they're more likely to follow through. They're more likely to follow through. I bet you would agree with that. The essence of our work would be to actually be able to listen to that soft, compassionate voice that lives within their own wisdom. So I'd love it right now if you took a moment to write down your own challenges, your own wows, and your own secrets. What are those challenges? What are the wows? Wow is those moments where you feel like all the work I've done is really, really helpful. And I really appreciate, those wow moments because They come rarely, but when they come, they feel like, this is why I do it. This is why I do the work. So here's the promise. If you get good at MI, not just listen to it, not just learn it, but actually turn on a tape recorder, practice. Sit across from a client, turn on a tape recorder, have somebody code the conversation, somebody observe the conversation, somebody coach you. And you're welcome to do that by calling my office at www.hetimane.org, 207-776-0740. You can get that coded, and we could give you feedback. But the practice is, if you get really good at this, here's my promise. The wows will go up, and the challenges will go down, and your secrets will become more apparent to you and to others. Hey, what do you think? If people are more willing to change, people seem to be more willing to change when they know they're completely free not to change. That seems very, very interesting. Very powerful. Why don't you think about that for a second and just take that in. When people are more willing to change, and they know they're completely free not to change. Amazing. Another thing I'd like you to think about is the person, the child, the family member is like a garden to be tended rather than a machine to be repaired. My hopes of this webinar is that you will become a gardener, not a mechanic. A gardener, not a mechanic. So what do you think? What would be your first move? What's that effective opening? I'm giving you 4 choices here. So do you feel like alcohol and drug abuse? Do you feel like alcohol and drug use right now? It's supposed to be, how do you feel? Number 10 is 1 to 10. Where do you rate your current level of motivation? Tell me your thoughts about your use. Let's take a moment to complete this checklist. What do you think? So the right answer here is, as you walk through them, is to tell me your thoughts about your use. You want to start with an open-ended question, and as open as possible. That creates your effective move. So, what we say matters. You see, going back there are several things you could say, but the question is, what do you say, how do you say, and watching how it lands. I bet you would agree with this, that the nature of the conversation is critical. I just wanted you to know that there are several. There's a slide here about a non-verbal client that Bill Miller does. It's in a DVD set, 1998. You can get through CASA, but there's several YouTube videos that I'd encourage you to look at and see about how people use empathetic reflections. So let's define motivational interviewing in a very more specific way. What I'd like to define it as, in a much more specific way, is that three ideas here. One, I'd like to notice presence, which is the ability to be with somebody without having to say anything. I mean, what would you say if you were just decided to not say? In other words, it was not verbal. You're just bringing your body there. And then there's interest. And how do you create an interest? How do you tell people that you're really interested in their story? That would, again, how do you do that? So what we're going to try to do is play with this a little bit. First, we want to talk about presence and listening well. So this is undivided attention. It's about acceptance. It's about being delighted to hear a story. And in your practice, I'd like you to try at moments to just give people undivided attention. See if you can quiet your mind. And then start to listen. Rather than sit directly across from people, just sit off to the side a little. Just sit off to the side a little. And then I'd like you to listen in your ears for wishes, dreams, and hopes. And then I want you to listen with an open heart. What's it like? What's it like to be them? As we move on and just being present with people, we have to say something. We have to be engaged some way. So the first response I'd like you to have is a way of showing them that you're interested, that you believe in them, that you want to hear them. So your very first response, after an opening question like, tell me about your use, you want to be reflective. You want to be an empathetic reflection. This is not reflective listening. This is an empathetic reflection. You are going through this. So let's imagine that somebody says that they would gain weight, if they kept smoking. And they don't want to do that. So the question becomes, what do you say? And so you reflect back to them. Even though you're staying on nicotine, you would say to them something like, having your body change is much more important to you than whether you smoke or not. And what you're doing is doing an empathetic reflection. You're thinking about just what it is that's going on. Throughout your exam at the end, you will hear many different aspects of empathetic reflection. And then there's a dash of curiosity. I always think of these three things like a giant kettle of soup. There's the broth, which I call presence. There's the ingredients, the pasta, the vegetables, the whatever you want to put into that beautiful kettle of soup. And then there's the spice, the dash of salt or pepper, a little bit of thyme, whatever it might be that you've added, a little bit of a garlic or chili powder. That's the dash of curiosity. With motivational interviewing, you want to be able to at least reflect 2 times more than you do ask questions. And you want to think reflectively first. So just imagine somebody says, I don't want to quit smoking. And your first response ought to be, it works for you. It's not, it relaxes you. It's not something you think about ever quitting. And the dash of curiosity will be, tell me about tobacco for you. It's an open-ended question. It taps into imagination, autonomy. It's a little bit of curiosity. Just like that kettle of soup. Too much spice will spoil the soup. Too many questions. Change the interview. Change the conversation to being about you and not about them. A reflection gives to people. A question demands people. So, ultimately, I want you to have these things that motivational is fluid and it can be influenced positively. That the influence comes in the context of our relationship with the client, with the patient, with the consumer, with the offender. And we're trying to guide the conversation towards people coming up with their own ideas. And our job is to influence. To influence people towards change, towards help. I guess the question becomes, do you believe that people have a self-determination towards help? Spend a moment with that question. Do you believe people have a self-determination towards help? So as the halfway mark here, we're just noticing that there really are 2 types of clients. There's the clients in action. They could utilize CBT or 12 steps or information. You can be in a support group. They're very willing clients. They're tired. They want change. They're relatively easy to deal with. And then there's another population, very big population, and probably more. Probably 80-20. These people are ambivalent. They have one side of them that wants to stay the same and one side that wishes for something to be different. Motivational interviewing is for this client. The client that it's ambivalent, has 2 sides. And everything we're doing is trying to move them towards the change talk, towards the action. That's the directional aspect of this conversation. So I just want to take a moment. I'm going to give you a few seconds here just to reflect. Maybe if you can, I'd like you to write down 5 characteristics of people who came into your life, who made a major positive influence. See what you can do. In this moment, just think about that question. The people who came into my life were very thoughtful. They were encouraging. They were non-judgmental. They saw the best in me. They believed in me. They listened well. They were supportive. Just to give you an idea, see what comes up for you. In the conversation with motivational interviewing, there are those people who influence us. If you look at that list, that is the job description you have for you to be able to work with people. Notice that list. Measure your work based on that list. If people influenced you, then I want you to do what the people had done to you. I want you to feel influenced by them. I want you to influence people around you. Don't change them. Don't give them advice. But actually, see what you can do about this word influence. What I'd like to do is to read you for a moment what that experience would feel like. This was written by William Miller, the original author of Motivational Interviewing. These experiences seem to happen unpredictably, unexpectedly. During the course of our work, I gradually became aware of a qualitative shift in my consciousness. It is through the boundaries between myself and this other begin to dissolve. And for a brief period, we are one consciousness. I do not experience this as a loss of my own identity. My uniqueness remains. Yet for a moment, I'm also melded with this other. I am fully alert, not drifting or daydreaming. I am intensely aware of this other human being with whom I am profoundly one. During this exercise, during this experience, brief as it is, time seems to stand still. And sometimes the physical surroundings dissolve or fade into the background. My own concerns are suspended. And my whole loving attention is focused on another, whom I've experienced in this moment with awe-filled respect. Then, again, gradually, my consciousness pulls back from the other, and I experience separateness again, but not quite as separate as before. That is the definition of engaging. Focusing is noticing what the focus of the problem, of the situation, of the ambivalence is. What is the conflict? Evoking is wondering with people, what are you going to do? What are you thinking about? And then listening for the commitment language or their plan for what's next. So, I'd love you to try it. I'd love you to take these circles and spend a moment with a friend and just try it out. Try it out with your loved one. As you finish this webinar, just try it. Just sit down with somebody and sort of say, hey, if you were to pick one of these areas that you would love to do something, but on the other hand, you're not able to do it. So it might be that you want to have more fun in your life, and on the other hand, you don't find the time to do it. So that's an example. Just sit down with a loved one and try. Have a conversation. Have them see these circles and pick one. Have a conversation about spiritual practice. On one hand, they like to have a deeper spiritual practice, and on the other hand, they don't. And see what you can do in that conversation. Because basically we learned in motivational interviewing there were 4 strategies. And those strategies were an open-ended question, an affirmation, a reflection, and a summary. When you get finished the exam that we're giving you, you will be asked to give examples of an affirmation or an open-ended question or simple reflection. The big part of an affirmation is to notice where they've acted in the place of courage. What I always say is applaud people being courageous. Because courage is the juice of spirituality. It's the place in where people have to let go. It's the awkwardness of change. It is the place in which, if you think of a flying trapeze artist, they swing on that single bar back and forth until they've got enough speed, and then one moment they take this courageous act and let go of the bar. And in the air, there's an awestruck moment of courage. The letting go. The landing somewhere different. You all have heard the phrase, meet people where they're at. And by taking this training, I hope that you actually stop meeting people where they're at. I hope that you meet people where they dream. See, the courage is to get from where you are to where your dreams are. The courage is to let go of the bar of the swinging trapeze artist, and it's the awestruck moment of being caught by a friend or a partner or a compassionate individual, compassionate giver. So these are the 4 strategies that we learned would be helpful in terms of engagement. So I've covered now the spirit of MI, which is those positive behaviors that people have done to you that influenced you. And then that's the spirit of MI. And then now we're talking about the skills of MI. What are those? Now the key here is, as you can see, is to be more reflective than questions. Well, as I said with the kettle, of that giant kettle of soup, that the spice is, in this case, the powerful open-ended questions shape and turn. They become navigators. You can feel that as the spice lands on your tongue, that it navigates the flavor of the entire soup. You can feel that the reflection, the pasta, the interest, the carrots, the onions, all that, vegetables. That's what seems to deepen the conversation. That's what makes it a full body kettle of soup. Affirmations is noticing the courage, noticing how they all fit together. The summary is, after you finish all of that giant bowl of soup that you've taken from the kettle and you've had it, you can feel the warmth. It helps solidify our work. It helps keep us on track. It helps focus us to the next session or on to the next subject. Summaries are like a bouquet of flowers. You hear the story from people and they're handing you flowers one by one, and you take them in your hand and you rearrange them and you pass them back. Rearrange. A lot of them dropped off. What you want is that summary to be poignant, so that the person feels heard, believed really in their soul that someone out there has heard them, listened well. Well, there's other techniques, of course. There's the ones I grew up with, which, you haven't lived up to your potential, Stephen. You're going to waste your life. You're never going to amount to much. I heard that a lot as a child. It still has I'm 65 and still has a resounding echo in my mind. I don't go any day without hearing a little bit of the whisper that I'm a failure, that I didn't do it good enough, that I'm a discipline. It's amazing how we can grow up in this conversation can literally stick to your consciousness, to your psyche. Also, what is an accurate empathetic reflection, since it is the major, most important skill of motivational interviewing? So I was thinking about practicing a few on you just now, if you could, and just so you can get a flavor of them. They're not so easy because we're not used to them. We're actually used to, we're very, very used to people telling us, being told what to do or asking lots of questions. So I'm just going to try a couple. A client says to you, I know I could do something differently, but I just want people to back off. I just want the situation to be less tense, and I wish they'd just stop talking to me about my alcohol and drug use. So in there, you really want to go for the parts of them that they wish for, which is you want something to be different here. Or you could do, you just want things to be less tense. So I'm just interested in, if you would, just to kind of think about, what would you say? I've been less depressed lately. I keep trying other things other than drinking to help myself feel better, but nothing seems to work except just a couple of drinks. What would you say? So I just want you to think about, right after you keep trying. Because that's the positive, that's the dream, that's the optimism. You're having a hard time finding something. You want something just different than alcohol to manage your depression. So I hope that gives you an idea, but you're looking for this concise, clear, assertive statement that really Make sure that people feel valued. So you're going to hear what the client says. You're going to hear what the consumer says. Then you're going to guess what they mean and state it back assertively. So I hope you can come up with some ideas for yourself there. This is my sweet son. I hope you enjoy him. He's 18 now and just in his first year of college. He's trying to demonstrate what we want an empathetic reflection to look like. He's got a latte. What we do when people say things to us, we just notice the foam on the top. The real hard work is to notice the espresso underneath. So somebody says, I don't think I can quit. You can sort of go with the foam, which is you're not ready to quit. That's the foam. That's what we call a simple reflection. And then underneath the espresso here would be you don't see any reason to quit. It's just not something that you're ready to do, even though other people might want you to. So you can see the difference here, and what we're trying to do here is just think about what are people not saying? I mean, what are people saying that we're not hearing? Or what do we need to hear that they're not saying? Oh, that was way too confusing, but let me just give you the example here of you hear the statement. What is it they're not saying that you could reflect on? That is a complex reflection. It's very helpful. It's also helpful to be wrong. What I mean by that is that even if the person says, no, that's not it, what you're going to do basically in that moment is you're going to wait, and they will tell you what it is. So you can't even go wrong with a good reflection, as long as it has a spirit attached to it, a kind, a compassionate spirit. I want to remind you it is what you say and how you say it and watching how it lands. Thank you, Sebastian. There are levels to that reflection, as I was talking about. When people are very hostile and aggressive, what I want you to do in that moment is just repeat, just stay close to the contact. This is in our crisis intervention training and so on, to be reflective, to express empathy is usually the first step in that crisis intervention. And really what I want you to do is the same thing in MI. If somebody's hostile, mad at you, or mad at the program, I want you to just stay close to the content. If not, I'd like you to try out in this basic training just to kind of go to work and think about how to amplify a concept, how to make it fatter and bigger. So somebody could say literally, I don't want to quit. I like my glass of wine. And so you can say that there's a way in which that glass of wine just really makes you feel relaxed, makes you feel at home. There's a way you've intensified the idea or the concept of what the person's doing. So let's imagine that another reflection could be that somebody says, I don't want to quit. I love my glass of wine. And so what you can say at that point is that, so you really love it. It feels good. And your partner is pretty furious about your drinking. And you care about that. And you want that relationship to live. So what you've done is the present reality of where they are, and never but, and here's the dream. The third possibility is reflecting a feeling of, and so the person says, I don't want to quit drinking. I really like my glass of wine. So you're scared that if you were to give up your glass of wine, then it's possible that they would ask you for more and more and more. And you don't want to do that. So it's just for you to think about these three levels: amplification, double-sided, and affective. And what they are is really for you to, to play with these kind of concepts that are the espresso in the latte. As simple as the foam. I won't spend time with showing you the money. It's really a way of practicing this. That you could practice this with using a couple of friends, and you could talk about something that you feel conflict on, focus on your health, and then you could actually see how many reflections you do over a 7-minute period. And what you could do in that period is to just have a conversation and see how reflective you are as a beginning practice. So a reflective statement involves what? Does it involve persuading the person to adopt a different point of view? Well, that would be unsolicited advice or direction. Distracting the person from a difficult negative conversation, trying to change it again, that would be unsolicited direction. Interpreting a complex, the interesting thing about that is it's interpreting, isn't it? It's coming from your expert opinion. So the final one is the real answer to this, and that is to rephrase what the person is saying in a different term. And that is a reflective statement, empathetic reflective statement. Well, what's underneath? What is it that you're not hearing? I just want to say to you, what you're not hearing is 4 things. You're not hearing that people yearn for power and control over the destiny of their lives. They want to love and to be loved. They want to feel capable and contribute to our community. And they want to be connected. They want to belong. They want to be a part of. That's the deepest core needs of the human experience. Underneath, like a water table that you cannot see, underneath the human experience of their fears and their self-protective patterns, their defense mechanisms, is a yearning, a deep, core yearning. Power and control, to love and to be loved, feel capable and contribute, be connected in some way. So just if you could, just stand up with a partner sometime and just ask them to, place your hands, and then person with the longest hair, push. Just push. See what happens. What's bound to happen is that you will equally match each other. So when you emotionally push people, they will equally match you. You will stay stuck. I love the conversation of the shy soul. I'd like you to do me a small favor, if you would. I'd like you to sit down for a moment and write out your dreams on a half a piece of paper. I want you to take a piece of paper. I want you to fold it in half. On the right-hand side, I'd like you to write down a dream, a wish for yourself. And on the other hand, I'd like you to write anything that might get in your way. And I know this sounds bizarre, but I'd like you to tear the paper. I'd like you to throw away the dream. And what you're left with is self-protective patterns. This is what you'll meet in clients, is a self-protective pattern. Hostility, silence, talking on and on, passive-aggressive, changing subjects. These are ways in which people protect themselves. You ask, what are they protecting themselves from? Well, they're actually protecting themselves from three things. One, abandonment. If I tell you what's really going on with me, you will abandon me. It happens to people. It did happen to people. That's why they're afraid of it. It hurts. It tells them that they're unworthy, that they're not lovable. It's the opposite of the core yearnings. The second is engulfment. Engulfment is a concept of, you will take over my life, you will tell me what to do, you will try to control me in some way. It is again in violation of the core yearnings of power, control over the destiny of one's life. And then finally, people are protecting themselves from any further shame, a feeling of inadequacy. They will do whatever they have to do to make sure that they do not feel more shame than they feel already from the stigma of the addiction, of mental illness, the stigma of mental illness, the stigma of a chronic health problem, the place where they don't belong, the family of origin trauma that they carry in their lives, that they were not lovable, the community of origin feelings of abandonment when they were in school and they were told they had a learning disability and they didn't fit in. That's what they're afraid of. And the shy soul lives behind that. And when you throw away the dreams, what you have left is the self-protective pattern. What I was hopeful today in this webinar is that you would make friends with their self-protective pattern. You would understand it. You would hold it with respect and compassion. You would give acceptance. You would understand. So I just want you to try the exercise, if you will, and see what you think, what you feel. You see, in this last sort of minute and a half, what I want you to do is to think about this issue of change talk, change theory. The ability to evoke a person's own resources, their own dreams, their own wishes, their own values, their intentions, to unlock this genius that lives within. So what is that change talk? You know, when we're focusing on this, we're trying to recognize the change talk, the change theory. We're trying to reinforce it by elaborating it, affirming it, reflecting it. When we are in a position where we need to offer people information, then I ask you to ask them, what do they want to do? What's their next step? What are they thinking about? Ask yourself or ask them, how important is it? And how confident are they that they can change this? So I want to say goodbye. I want you to notice the literature and the research that's been done. There's some really good resources around MI. I'd like you to, if you would, you know, as you see this last slide on one thing you liked and one thing you learned and relearned, I would love to ask yourself, what's next? How do I keep practicing motivational? I'd like to leave you with a quick story. When I was a small boy, about 16, I was incarcerated. And one day I sat on a bench in a baseball diamond outside of the confinement of the institution, leaning up against the wall, the fence that would take me to freedom. Leaning up against that wall, I had thought with my buddy we would scale the wall and go for it. The next time somebody hit a home run, well, they didn't. So I got up into the plate and I hit the hardest ball I could because I was so angry. Couldn't get a chance to scale the wall. And then I realized I could scale the wall as I ran around the bases. I kept running. I started to run as fast as I could, as much as muscle as I could, because I knew that if I could get a head start, I would keep going. I would hit home plate and I'd take about 4 more steps. I'd hit the bench, I'd hit the fence, and I could scale over the fence because it did not have a barbed wire. And then I would fall down below and be by the highway, and I would keep going. I remember the dream well. I came to home plate and I put both of my feet on it, and I didn't go. I spent another 1.5 years in that institution, and I'm glad I didn't go. My life would have been changed. I would have steal and stolen and figured out how to survive. I want you to know that change comes in an instant in people's lives. Just be present. You'll hear it. It's a miracle. Thank you.